Persona 3 and the Persona series in general is chock full of amazing music. I first got into the games in high school with Persona 3, so it holds a special place in my heart. But it's nothing short of miraculous that the subsequent Persona 4 and Persona 5 have kept up the insanely high quality of music while introducing their own unique flavors. I would really like to include the whole soundtrack, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna narrow it down to just the Endgame music, which is a pair of songs, The Battle for Everyone's Souls and Burn My Dread Last Battle. These both play during the final battle of the game, so spoiler warning for days, as once again we're dealing with endgame stuff. So just a quick side note, there are a few different versions of Persona 3. There's Persona 3 FES, and there's P3P. The different versions have wildly different soundtracks, but for this video we'll be focusing on the FES version of the soundtrack. That being said, let's listen to some key parts from both songs, starting from The Battle for Everyone's Souls. The song starts out heavy on the rock guitar, definitely good for getting the blood pumping. Speaking of blood pumping, this drum beat here very much imitates an elevated heartbeat. The next part is gonna sound very familiar to anyone who's played Persona, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but here a wordless female vocal joins in, adding an eerie gothic vibe to the piece. Our second song, Burn My Dread Last Battle, takes place during the final phase of the boss battle, because in JRPGs it's never that simple and the final boss always goes through multiple forms. It's a complete tonal shift, entering squarely into J-hip-hop territory. It's relatively uncomplicated, switching between these kick-ass rap sections and these repeated female vocals. Next, I'm gonna touch briefly on relevant story and gameplay. If you're already well acquainted with the Persona series, feel free to skip ahead. The game starts off with your main character transferring into a new school, moving into his new dorm, but things take a strange turn very early, with everyone else seemingly frozen into coffins. We soon find out that there's this mysterious extra dark hour that only people with potential are aware of. It turns out that all your dorm mates are part of a group called C's, and they've tasked themselves with investigating the aforementioned Dark Hour. Lots of these monsters, called Shadows, come out during the Dark Hour, and the member of C's can each summon a mythological being called a persona to fight and protect themselves. Just a quick note, they summon their personas by shooting themselves with these special spirit guns, because things can get pretty wild in Japanese RPGs. Well, we quickly discover that the protagonist is unique in that he can summon multiple personas and is quickly recruited into C's. You and all your team members attend school and hang out in clubs or with friends during the day, and at night explore and investigate Tartarus, a strange tower that only appears during the Dark Hour. You progress through much of the Japanese school year like this, with a mix of story, social simulator, and dungeon crawling turn-based battles. From the first moment the protagonist summons his persona, he is helped by this creepy guy named Igor, who only appears in the Velvet Room. The Velvet Room, as Igor explains it, is a place that exists between dream and reality, mind and matter, and it's here that Igor teaches us how to fuse and combine multiple personas into stronger ones. He also encourages our character to go out and make friends, creating and improving social links, which not only reveals hidden stories with a colorful cast of side characters, but also strengthens the personas we use in battle. One thing that's abundantly clear when progressing through the story is that Persona 3 delves heavily into its central theme of death. Now, death is an incredibly general and broad theme to explore, but for a JRPG, I think they do a damn good job. The game examines how our characters deal with loss, as each C's member loses a loved one, either in events prior to the story or through the course of the game. There's all these separate instances of our characters dealing with grief, whether they bury their feelings and try to forget or become hell-bent on revenge. Even until the end of the game, they're coming to terms with loss in their own ways. Near the end of the school year, it's revealed that Nyx, the personification of death itself, will soon descend upon the world and bring about the end of all life. While the end of the world is pretty typical JRPG stakes, the way your team members deal with this fact is pretty atypical of JRPGs. The final month leading up to the end is full of these introspective, quiet moments where the characters struggle with the implications of their impending death. By the time Nyx arrives at the top of Tartarus, each SEES member has reached their own catharsis and steeled themselves to face death, quite literally. Speaking of literal, this is when our song, The Battle for Everyone's Souls, kicks in. The heavy metal guitar feels so appropriate for a final showdown with death. And all the death imagery from throughout the game just come together so well in this scene. The character's use of the guns is a dramatic visualization of how they've accepted death and thus ready to face it. The battle taking place on top of Tartarus, which in Greek mythology is an underworld deeper than even Hades' realm. Not to mention, drawing on Greek mythology again, Nyx was a mother of both death and darkness, a goddess that even Zeus himself feared. If you've watched through my previous video, you'll know that I love a good musical callback, and the Endgame music has that in spades. Remember Igor and the Velvet Room? Well, here's the Velvet Room theme in all 5 Persona games. You hear this music dozens of times throughout the game as you visit the Velvet Room to strengthen and combine your personas. It's so iconic, I don't think they changed anything about the song from Persona 2 onwards. And now, back to The Battle for Everyone's Souls in just a moment. Bam! That's the Velvet Room theme, lifted wholesale and placed on top of the rocking guitar part. Earlier, I joked about, oh, the end of the world and typical JRPG. But when that familiar operatic voice comes in, it drove home just how high the stakes really are. It's like the game saying, you've heard this song for hours cumulatively throughout your journey, but here it is, one last time as you face down death itself. Of course, it ends up that fighting death was a fool's errand, and Nyx, tiring of games, transforms into its final form and effortlessly incapacitates everyone. In one final trip to the Velvet Room, however, the bonds and social links you've forged give you the strength to resist Nyx and stand up to death one more time. This is when our other endgame song, Burn My Dread Last Battle, starts up. And as per the name, this is actually the last battle. Here we have even more callbacks, so let's go all the way back to before we even start the game, before we even press any buttons. Here's the opening cutscene that plays. It also plays every time we start up the game. By the time we reach the final boss, about 70 hours into the game, the opening song is well ingrained and maybe even a bit routine, but there's something so fitting about the first song we hear receiving an exhilarating remix to be the final song of battle. Now let's cut to another cutscene. This one plays when we first start a new game.
The next stop is
You got to let it move first, let it out. Damn depressed, let's get it on. Then what you gonna do is
This is the final train bound for Tatsumi Port Island. Please make sure you board in time for departure.
At the start, our protagonist is isolated from the world, hearing nothing but the song pump through his headphones. In the end, he's facing death, alone again, listening to the same song, but this time he can also hear the voices of the friends he's made along the way encouraging him on.
I won't allow this world to be destroyed! Alright, let's do this.
That's 2 videos in a row that feature musical callbacks, but when it's done this well, I can't help but love it. Thank you once again for watching this video.